Today, Ether drops to the $3,400 level ahead of the expected launch of spot Ether ETFs in the US. Hong Kong will play host to a new type of Bitcoin ETF, which would allow investors to bet against the cryptocurrency. And David Duong with Coinbase weighs in on the impact for crypto after President Biden drops his re-election bid and a new Democratic challenger is poised to take on former President Trump, who's recently positioned himself as pro-crypto. Major cryptocurrencies slightly in the red this morning following President Biden's decision to bow out of the presidential race yesterday. As of noon Eastern, Bitcoin turned slightly lower this morning to the $67,000 level after hitting a high of $68,485. That's the highest level since June 13th. Ether dropped to below the $3,500 level, hours ahead of the expected launch of spot Ether ETFs here in the US. Solana, however, is resisting the downdraft, marking its fifth positive session in a row, with the cryptocurrency hitting its highest level since the end of May earlier this morning. All right, let's talk about the top stories. Asia's first inverse Bitcoin ETF that allows investors to bet on a drop in the price of the cryptocurrency is set to launch in Hong Kong tomorrow. Hong Kong's CSOP Asset Management will debut the CSOP Bitcoin Futures Daily Inverse product on the city stock exchange tomorrow morning. The product aims to provide investment results that closely correspond to the one-time inverse daily performance of the S&P Bitcoin Futures Index. The ETF is expected to take advantage of increasing demand to profit from the volatile trading of crypto. In fact, the CEO of CSOP Asset Management said the first futures-based inverse Bitcoin product listed in Hong Kong creates opportunities for investors to gain from downside movements in Bitcoin. The move, announced this morning, follows the launch of the continent's first Bitcoin futures ETF in December 2022, and in April, Hong Kong launched several spot Bitcoin and Ether ETFs, becoming the first in Asia to offer retail investors the ability to trade the cryptocurrencies at spot prices. Next, Bitforex says it will open for withdrawals following a months-long outage sparked by a Chinese police investigation. The crypto exchange announced the development in a post on X on Friday, noting that trading and deposits will remain suspended, but that withdrawals will be open for clients that complete Know Your Customer verification. That includes passport, phone number, and other identification information. An exact date as to when the crypto exchange will reopen for withdrawals was not provided. We reached out to Bitforex for more information, but did not immediately hear back. In the post, Bitforex disclosed that on February 23rd of this year, the company's team was detained and investigated by the Jiangsu province police in China, causing the platform to become inaccessible. In early March, Hong Kong's securities regulator issued a warning about the crypto exchange due to suspected fraud. Bitforex said on Friday that due to the sensitive nature of that situation, it was unable to provide timely notifications to users. All right, back to markets for our main story. I spoke with David Duong, the head of institutional research at Coinbase, about how much Biden's move to drop out of the 2024 presidential race impacts crypto prices and what we could expect following the launch of spot Ether ETFs in the U.S. All right, we have been on this run-up for Bitcoin in the past week or so, and I think a lot of people attribute that to the Trump, both the RNC, the shooting, and expectations that he could win in November, which is seen as a boon for crypto. Now, all of that has changed in the past 24 hours, and I want to get to that stuff, but I want to start with that narrative there about the Trump effect on crypto. Is that where you attribute the crypto market right now, these moves we've seen in the past week? Do you agree that it's largely a pro-Trump rally?
I think it's a bit of both in terms of the technicals as well as the fundamentals, driven by what we've seen in this election cycle. I mean, we've previously said that the election would be a major driver for crypto in the second half of this year. And I think that is, in fact, what we're seeing. And, already a lot of newspapers have gone over this kind of dynamic between the regulatory environment that's expected under a Trump administration and why that might be supporting crypto markets. But I really think that we also had this huge technical overhang kind of coming from a lot of buyers indiscriminately selling into this market. A lot of that is kind of over with. There's still some residual, like, for example, Mt. Gox is a big one. But I think given the fact that these elections are coming in just under 100 days, the expectation is that a lot of these people will probably just sit on the Bitcoin they have rather than trying to sell into the market at this point.
Yeah, there are other factors I want to ask you about, particularly on the macroeconomic front. But obviously, sticking with politics for a minute, we just found out that Biden's exiting the race and Harris is becoming potentially the next nominee once we get to the DNC. We have to see where nominations fall, where superdelegates fall. How much of that does this change the calculus for investors, if at all, now that this election has changed so much?
I think we're still waiting to see what the ultimate decisions are going to be on this side. Is it going to be Kamala Harris as the candidate, for example? And if it is, who's going to be her vice presidential pick? But I think that a lot of people are already looking ahead, not just to the presidential election itself, but everything it represents, because, there's not a lot of split ticket voters in this country anymore. And I think that maybe with, a new Democratic candidate, there's a lot of the thoughts around what's going to happen both in the House as well as the Senate. And I think that dynamic could still be transformative for issues like crypto.
How would a theoretical Kamala Harris administration be different than a Biden administration? Do you see this as a potential sharp pivot? Because it seems like regardless of what happens and who wins in January, Gary Gensler may not necessarily be heading up the SEC come January. So regardless of who wins, how different does this feel for crypto come January?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It's still very uncertain, particularly since it's not just what's happening in the executive branch, but we've seen, for example, the Supreme Court's overturning of Chevron deference also having an impact on executive agencies and their power. And even then, I think that should have been absorbed as a positive market catalyst, but it wasn't really, because people are still trying to parse, well, how are the courts going to factor in terms of decisions that might affect crypto, for example. And all the while, we are seeing that there's a lot of progress happening offshore, like Mika, for example, just put in place the stablecoin legislation on June 30th, for example. You're seeing a lot of progress happening in Asia. So all the while, the U.S. keeps feeling like it's falling behind, and the regulatory arbitrage is very apparent. But I think it's really hard to kind of parse what would happen between a Biden versus a Kamala Harris kind of administration. I think that there's probably a lot of contingencies with regards to fiscal spending and how that will impact inflation, monetary policy, and I think all of that kind of impacts long duration assets, not just crypto, but tech stocks and other assets as well.
Yeah. Moving beyond politics, there is a lot of other things that are affecting crypto markets right now. And one of them is the Fed and the focus on whether the Fed intends to cut rates come September. It seems like it's at least a little more likely. Do you feel like that's affecting markets right now? How much of an impact does a potential rate cut in September have for crypto?
So I think the interesting thing about rate cuts is that it doesn't happen just in isolation, right? At least the impact on markets. Obviously, I think the first order thought process is if we get rate cuts, it unlocks a lot of liquidity that should be supportive of long duration assets like crypto. But really, it also depends on what is the economic environment we're in at that time, because more and more I've been seeing people who believe that there's going to be a potential recession in the fourth quarter of this year. I do not subscribe to that. I actually take the complete opposite view to that. I think that we could actually see a productivity boom that could actually start maybe in the second half of this year, maybe in 2025. But I think that would actually be the start of a multi-year economic positive cycle, in which case crypto could do very well in that. But the concern is that if we do have a downturn in the economy, for example, even with rate cuts, the fear is that you won't see the retail investor want to come in with a lot of money because there will be concern about the economy. Again, I don't think that's going to be the case, but it is interesting to see that there's such a wide dichotomy in terms of views on the economic cycle right now. You don't typically see that. Typically, a lot of economists converge towards the middle. But in this case, I feel like there's so many economic indicators right now that are telling you so many different stories. And that's really the problem. This is why we're seeing such diverse kind of opinions here. We're kind of stuck in a range that might persist for the next 2 months before the economy starts to kind of take off. And I think that the Fed cuts will then be very supportive. And I think we could have a very good fourth quarter, for example. I do think that having the ETFs has been pivotal in that change, because now that people are able to have this in the brokerage accounts, soon we're going to have the spot ETFs in the US as well. I think that could be a change, because for any clients who may not want, for example, a single asset ETF in their books, there's a very strong likelihood that they're going to have a more diversified crypto ETF that will probably come in the future that they're going to be able to invest in. So I do think that those things are going to change the way people trade in the space.
That brings me to my final question, which is about those Ether ETFs. There are rumors, there's expectations that they could start trading as soon as tomorrow, July 23rd. Regardless of if and when they start trading, how much of an impact would those have on the crypto market and also interest from Wall Street?
I think the current expectation from the institutional clients that I speak to is fairly weak at this point. Many are expecting a repeat of what happened with the spot Bitcoin ETFs in January, for example, which is that at least in the first 2 weeks, it could be kind of dull. But I actually think that because expectations are so low and people aren't positioned for it, like that buy the rumor, sell the fact kind of dynamic isn't really present with spot ETH ETFs in the way they were with spot Bitcoin ETFs. So I think that there's a strong potential for them to actually surprise to the upside. So maybe even if the first week, for example, is slow, I think that the dynamic could actually ramp up pretty quickly. And what people aren't considering is that unlike Bitcoin, which typically is a buy and hold kind of asset, people equate it to digital gold, for example. ETH is actually used in a lot of transactions in decentralized finance. So its ecosystem is actually littered with like ETH being used as collateral for different protocols that I think could actually have a multiplier effect on ETH performance itself. Because when that ETH is worth more, for example, if you have ETH backing a stablecoin like DAI, for example, and now that collateral is worth more, you actually have more available ETH to actually spend on other things. And I think that kind of grows the pie a lot faster. So I think the dynamic between the ETF flows and price itself is also going to be a lot stronger now in a way that it wasn't for the spot Bitcoin ETFs.
All right, that's all for Crypto World today. We'll be back again tomorrow, and we'll see you then.